Welcome to this presentation entitled Death and Life, Crafting Christian Resources for Living Well in the Light of Mortality. I'll be using PowerPoint slides for most of the presentation, and they'll be on your screen, but I'll make an appearance again in the middle and finally at the end. My interest in this area began late in life. As I sat at my dying mother's bedside in 2010, she told me about the rows upon rows of radiant, iridescent angel wings that she could see. They told me that they would be beautiful, she said, but I didn't expect anything like this glory. I have placed my soul in God's hands. That experience made me reappraise older people and those younger people who are close to death as eschatological visionaries, poised on the threshold between this age and the age to come, this earth and the heavenly places. There is something about ageing and the last years of life that seems to involve a thinning of the veil that separates the two. Or to put it another way, it's as if some old people, including people with dementia, have reached a mountaintop and can see new vistas as yet hidden over the horizon from the rest of us. This gives a whole new meaning to that phrase, over the hill. These mountaintop visionaries can, if we let them, tell us what they see. Yet they are unlikely to speak plainly about their visions uninvited, and those who are frail or confused may only be able to mumble, gesture weakly, or give fragmentary, incoherent accounts. The onus is then on the Church to pay full attention to them, with an expectation of learning something significant, to give space and permission for them to articulate their visions, and to encourage older people to raise their expectations so that they can tune into this capacity and own it. In fact, the whole community of the Church needs to raise her own expectations, to live as if we really do believe in the resurrection life we proclaim, instead of simply following this world in its horror and fear at the approach of death, and to be curious about the nature of heaven. After she died, I recalled that my mother had regularly visited her local cathedral in her final years for private prayer. My father told me that he thought that she was preparing herself for death. I had just taken up a post as advisor for the spiritual care of older people in the Diocese of Oxford, and in a conversation with a colleague I referred to my mother's practice. My colleague responded, "Why do people have to do this alone? Why don't we help them more?" And an idea was born. The idea turned into a project that has spanned 7 years and whose impact will, I hope, last longer. This slide charts its history, beginning with the construction and delivery of a pilot course for older people on living well at the end of life and preparing for death. The dissemination of what had been learned from this, developing and delivering training courses for clergy and other pastoral leaders, research evaluation of similar events, and the development of resources in the light of this evaluation. On this slide, you can see the programme for the first pilot course, which took place back in 2012. And from this, you can see that it covered practical, psychological, and spiritual aspects of facing mortality. Each session included tea and cake that turned out to be vital components. The course was far more successful on several different criteria than I could ever have imagined when I planned it. This slide gives some selected but representative comments taken from the evaluation sheets when the course ended. I'll read them out. It was so good to talk about and share all of these things, mixing the practical, Bible notes, music, laughter, and cake and tea. Thank you so very much. The emphasis in an early talk on what you would like to be remembered, that is, a memory box of significant items, helped to anchor me as a real person and not a pale shadow. Thank you for affirming my identity as a person. It was interesting to have other people's views and attitudes on the various subjects, and also to have talks by professionals. This refers to talks that were part of the course given by palliative care nurses, a solicitor, and a funeral director. I appreciated the opportunity to discuss aspects of this sensitive subject openly, without embarrassment or reluctance, so often experienced in other situations. You have almost lovingly and effectively removed my underlying fear of dying. You have confirmed my faith and certainty in the kingdom of heaven as a future reality for those who seek Jesus Christ. A very useful course. I often wonder about people of other religions and no religion. I can't believe they are all doomed. The whole pilot was presented at several conferences and written up for publication in the journal Working with Older People, and the reference for that article is given in the abstract for this presentation. After that, I attempted to encourage similar initiatives by running study days aimed at clergy in particular. And the reason for that is that Anglican and several other services of ordination require clergy explicitly to prepare the dying for their death. So this was not presented as a new, optional, exotic area of ministry that clergy could ignore or delegate to lay pastors, but something that is central to their calling that they perhaps needed to rediscover. A total of about 60 participants attended these study days, and these are the main things that emerged from the events. I gave them all the Death Attitude Profile revised questionnaire to look at their attitudes to death and dying, and the scores indicated that these were predominantly those of neutral acceptance, that is, death is a natural thing, and approach acceptance, that is, death is the doorway to something even better. The participants in these study days reported a mismatch between their formal theology of death and their personal beliefs. together with a lack of confidence and paucity of training in how to explore these issues with people as part of their ongoing life of faith. They identified a number of theological and practical issues that troubled them, and there are two examples on the slide. Bodily resurrection, hell, the exclusivity of the claims of Christianity, apparent in some readings of John chapter 14, which is a very popular text to be read at funerals. Heaven as a way of avoiding engaging with social injustices in the here and now. And what to make of people who die leaving much unfinished business in their lives and relationships. And there were practical concerns about how you raise this sensitive subject with people, how you can get expert supervision, where you can find networks of other people working in the area, and how do you engage younger people in this area. But despite the theological issues that troubled them and the practical challenges that faced them, it was clear that there was a very high degree of enthusiasm at the prospect of developing this area within their ministry. They wanted more resourcing, and in particular, written resources. Around this time, the Henry Smith charity heard about this work, and they invited Oxford Diocese to put in a bid to them to fund its development. The Henry Smith charity has a particular interest in supporting and developing the ministry of Anglican clergy. And so the project was directed not so much at the impact of this initiative on the participants of the clergy-led events, as in the pilot, where I was interested in the impact of the people who attended the course, but instead it wanted to support and increase the competence and the confidence of those who were leading such events. The funding that we received enabled us to employ a practical theologian with a background in health chaplaincy as the project officer for 3 years, Dr. Victoria Slater. So the first 18 months of the project, once Dr. Slater joined us, was devoted to a detailed, largely qualitative account of the events that were springing up all over the diocese in response to the study days that I had run in 2014. And as is often the case with clergy, they were all different and idiosyncratic. Their form, and indeed the titles chosen for them, were variable. They were determined by the interests of the leaders and of their particular contexts. And their contexts covered rural, suburban, and urban settings. They included one ecumenical project. They served, all of them, a largely older population, with predominantly, though not exclusively, white participants and leaders. And the slide summarises the characteristics of those events. These events were studied by in-depth interviews with the people who were running them and some additional interviews with the participants. On this slide, you can see the themes that emerged from the interviews. The points in white were the themes in the language of their original coding. The points in yellow are those themes translated, reduced into summaries that are stated in terms of what the researcher concluded were the significant action processes that were at work. These were meeting a real need, enabling intimacy and reducing isolation, being pastorally effective, learning through leading, building missional networks of relationships, and doing grassroots theology. At the end of this phase, we brought all the event leaders together for a meeting in which we thanked them, presented our findings, asked for their feedback, and introduced the idea of the Ars Moriendi. This group of leaders confirmed that the themes that we had identified were representative of their thinking and experience, and they emphasised the need for accessible, off-the-peg resources for busy church leaders on the ground. In further discussion with our steering group for the project, the issue of demographic diversity of our participant groups was also raised, specifically with regard to ethnicity. On consulting our funders, we found that they wished us to move from a phase of observation, support and reflection to one of resource development. So that is the background to the project that I'm now going to present to you. And that project is called Death and Life. We began our project of constructing resources by convening a theological working group made up of Dr. Slater, myself, and 3 of the event leaders from the Oxford Diocese. And we supplemented our existing material by carrying out 3 creative workshops with 3 very different groups, including one from a Black majority church. We decided after much discussion to produce a web-based resource with largely free downloadable materials supported by some published low-cost material. And these are the 3 strands of the resource. Firstly, wanting to enable people to listen well to people of all ages by going beyond words to creative activities. And we followed that up through our creative workshop and our book Seriously Messy, which I'll come on to present. Secondly, as in the original pilot, preparing for death, the well-prepared course. And thirdly, incorporating death and resurrection into the whole life of faith, constructing an ars vivendi, not just an ars moriendi. And that idea underpinned our Living Well resources. The following slides are some screenshots from our web-based resource. The web was produced by a professional designer, Mrs. Jo Ind, and this is its URL and home page. And you can see from this that there are a number of sections. The following slides give just an idea of what can be found on each one. However, I warmly encourage you to go to the website and explore it for yourself. The About section contains a lot of background information, but also makes clear the principles on which the whole project rests. The first one of which is people should be met where they are. We were very aware of the ethical issues in working in this area and the need to avoid making things worse for participants who might potentially be vulnerable, of leaders getting out of their depth or suffering unexpected stress. So the good practice section addresses these issues. And here you can see the section on support and supervision. The creative workshop section contains everything needed to facilitate a single 2-hour session, enabling participants to explore and express their feelings and ideas about mortality through creative art. Most of the materials are downloadable or cheaply available. We also produced a set of reflection cards. Some are on the right-hand side of this slide. These cards are to support reflection and discussion on life after death around a number of biblical texts. These can be bought via the website, though during the pandemic this option has temporarily ceased. Hopefully that will be possible again soon. The course section is a refinement of the original pilot study and is the closest to an Ars Moriendi. It's supported by a handbook, also available for purchase via the website. The Living Well section is the largest section and is, as I've said, essentially an ars vivendi. It takes 6 theological themes that are important across the whole lifespan of the Christian faith, but are thrown into sharp relief around the time of death. The themes are loving, letting go, seeing, growing, belonging, hoping. For each theme, there is a set of Bible studies, a sermon starter, an audio meditation, links to visual art, music and poetry, and a basic design for a prayer station. These can be used flexibly on their own or in a whole range of combinations. For example, the 6 prayer stations can be arranged as a prayer walk. Finally, and apart from the website, we took seriously the idea of older people as eschatological visionaries, whose insights should be received by the whole church. We designed resources for intergenerational engagement with mortality. This was done in collaboration with the Messy Church team from the Bible Reading Fellowship. And you can see that the themes in this book are similar but not identical to those in the Living Well section of the website. This book isn't available via the website, it's available from commercial outlets, including Amazon. So, I hope you've enjoyed this brief narrative that charts an enterprise that took a long time, a huge amount of creative effort, prayer, reflection, action, debate from a very large number of people, exploring an Ars Vivendi and an Ars Moriendi for our time. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the resources, and my contact details are on the slide if you want to learn more.